Welcome to the esynergy podcast, conversations that cut through the hype to get to what works. I'm Paul Shiu, Delivery Director at esynergy. In each episode, we sit down with leaders to listen to their unfiltered stories, the lessons learned in both successes and failures, and the practical steps to turn big ideas into real impact. Today, we're joined by Nadine Thomson, CTO across multiple multinational organisations. Welcome, Nadine.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here.
Brilliant. Today, we'll be exploring the topic of business transformation, the decisions, struggles, and challenges behind them. It's not just about the technology, but about the people and the decisions that are made and the insights to move forward. So, Nadine, for our viewers who don't really know what business transformation is, how would you explain it to them?
So a good question. I think I'm sure many of the viewers will probably have been through or been part of some change or transformation in a business, Paul. I've led global transformation across over 100 markets and multiple operating companies and also multiple sectors. So I've led transformation across retail, insurance, professional services, and media. And the way I think about transformation is it's the gap between an organization's biggest hopes and dreams and what it's actually willing to change. And organizations often fall in making that true transformation because they're not actually willing to sort of make that overall change. For a transformation to be transformational, so beyond just a business change, it needs to address a business's biggest pain point or a business's biggest opportunity. So it needs to address something like a large cost challenge, or it needs to unlock growth through revenue or margin, or perhaps it addresses customer retention, or it's a big change because of a regulatory change that's been forcing through the sector. And through my experience of transformation, I've sort of categorized them into sort of three areas. The first one's complex. That's often across multi-geography countries. They're structural transformations. There's usually a lot of politics to navigate through, lots of working with stakeholders, lots of thinking about how do you address global versus local, and what is standard versus what's flexible around the edges. The second type of transformation I go into a lot of is broken, where something in the business is fundamentally not working. And I've seen that across insurance and cinema. And what's interesting with those transformations is making sure you diagnose what's broken correctly, because often what looks like a tech problem is actually a people challenge. So that's been super interesting.
Yeah.
And then just finally, in sort of categorizing transformations, the third category I'd say is scaling, so where a business is going through growth. And they're really interesting transformations because you have two audiences. You've got your internal business audience plus investors or shareholders, which means that you need to focus on prioritizing your internal transformation, but also making sure things are externally visible. But what I sometimes find, or actually more often than not find, is that it's a mixture of all three: complex, broken, and scaling. Yeah. And you've got a technology estate that's a spaghetti mess, stakeholders that aren't aligned, you've got politics that are not simple or visible, and no one right answer. And they're the transformations that I tend to enjoy the most.
Brilliant. I think you made a good point. I think when you said that it's not just about the process necessarily, that's my next question actually. So what do you think are the important considerations? So people, I guess our viewers are used to people, process, and then technology.
Yeah.
What's your kind of view on that? What are the important factors that should be considered as part of business transformation?
Yeah. So definitely there's that triangle, the well-known triangle, people, process, technology, and that does apply. There is another factor, which maybe we can talk about in a bit as well, which is operating model. And that's the piece that usually makes a difference between actually change in a business or change around the edges and actually transformation. But if I come back to that triangle, what I found is you can get away with imperfect technology, you can get away with imperfect process. What you can't get away with is imperfect, making not getting the people part right. And the other thing I'd observe about that triangle is often it's approached in the wrong way. So you'll select a technology platform. We're going to roll out Salesforce or SAP or a data platform or a new customer app. Easy. And so we choose technology, put the process in, tell the people, and then that's not really necessarily transformation. That's kind of rolling out a technology platform.
Yeah.
So the harder and more difficult but more rewarding and valuable work is to do it in reverse. So and that bit is often sort of not the way that things are tackled.
Yeah. Yeah, we come across that a lot in consultancy. And actually, again, great segue to the next one, which is, I think you mentioned it, operating model. It's easier, I think, in our experience looking at clients and they say, oh, here's a project and let's do the technology, as you say. But what advice would you give to viewers or organisations watching? Why should we do it in the reverse order, and why is it so important in the context of the operating model? And how should people consider that?
Yeah, no, I might sort of pick two things out of your question there. So I think the first thing I would answer is why do it in the reverse order? And let me give you an example of a transformation I did in the reverse order that actually wouldn't have been successful doing it technology first. And then I'll come back to operating model. So I was working for an insurance business. It was made up of 150 different acquisitions. So you can only imagine the number of systems, the number of processes, the number of stakeholders. And what was really tempting to do in that scenario was to get to a platform. So we're looking at, say, a claims processing platform, policy administration platform. Really tempting to choose a technology because it feels like you're moving forward. You've got something to anchor around. But I didn't in that particular transformation, and it was the right decision because what needed to happen first was first of all, what was happening across the business is that different parts of the business were using different data and making decisions in different ways. So thinking about that kind of policy admin and sort of claim system, each business had a different way of categorizing a risk or defining a risk, categorizing a customer, calculating a margin. And until the business sort of came together and decided which way they were going to go forward with those different areas, there is no way you could put in a single technology platform that would work in the right way. And so the harder work there was getting together like many divisional heads and agreeing on what a risk, what a margin, how are we going to calculate margin. And that's particularly difficult in that scenario. And I've seen this in others as well, where they own the P&Ls and they're protecting their P&L plus their ways of working. And so there is real kind of tension in sort of making those decisions.
It's almost a conflict, isn't it? Between
almost a conflict. Yeah. Definitely. And that leads me nicely, I think, to the operating model piece, because it's another conflict. And so often what I see in transformation is that you mostly deal with the people factor, mostly deal with the process factor and the technology. But operating model is something people often don't tackle because it's fundamental to the business and really hard to change, or it's just not thought about sometimes during transformation. So when I say operating model, just so everyone's sort of coming along with us, I'm thinking about how decisions are made in an organization, who has accountability for what's the workflow between teams, what incentives exist in the organization. And so thinking about an example, I was rolling out a global platform for a multinational organization in the media sector. And this global platform was, in theory, simple to roll out. It was bringing together a number of client products and creating consistency across the organization. It also allowed us to, get better, increase our customer or our client satisfaction and identify areas that we could grow within the clients. And we were asking operating companies and markets to come onto this platform. And the challenge that I ran into there was the incentive structure was such that markets and operating companies were incentivized to win and retain clients. And that ended up being at a conflict with coming onto a standard platform where to win and retain a client, you often needed to create something that was client-specific or follow a client-specific process. And so through group mandates and kind of the hard yards of stakeholder alignment and people work, we got the company, or I got the company to 80% there, 80% onto the platform. But that last 20% of the transformation couldn't happen without an incentive change.
Right.
And that organisation was just not at a place where that incentive change would make sense for the organisation. There were dependencies, other things going on behind the scenes, which is sometimes right for a business.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I mean, that's an 80% transformation from where that organisation came from to where it is now. I mean, that the organisation should be quite proud of the change it's made. And that 20% it will make when the time is right. But that's a great example of where operating model gets in the way of transformation or can really prevent organisations making that full leap.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you for that. I think a big topic, no surprise, is AI. For our viewers, I guess, how does AI fit into business transformation? AI in itself is a big topic. Business transformation is a massive topic.
Yeah.
So how do the two do they fit together?
I think so. I think if let me come backwards and talk about people's purpose, which is an important aspect to transformation we haven't touched on yet, because I think that then impacts sort of how AI is adopted in an organisation. So my experience of getting successful transformations in an organisation is ensuring you know what people care about, what they stand to lose or gain from a transformation, whether that be their status, their teams, their budgets, their job security. What's their purpose in an organisation? And I've actually got an interesting story about a lady called Carol who almost derailed an entire transformation. Remind me to tell you that later.
Yeah.
That is a forcing factor of whether a transformation is successful or not. And it's also whether leadership are aware of people's purpose and what they care about and what they stand to lose and gain and willing to tackle it. So coming back to your question sort of on AI, I think where organizations, I think one of the transformations organizations are starting to address and are perhaps struggling with a little bit is AI has the ability to take someone's professional identity and purpose away. When a model can do or know something that you've spent your entire career kind of forming, that's a loss of identity. And I think to make meaningful change in an organization, you need to be able to find these people new purpose that is meaningful.
One of the big things, I guess, again, with AI would be people fear taking over of the jobs. So what you've mentioned there, how do organisations try and roll in AI to try and make sure that transformations are smooth from that perspective? Or is it always a case of you have to accept a level of job loss or cost savings, or are there different ways to look at it?
I think what's interesting about AI at the moment and where it comes to kind of return on investment is I'm seeing soft metrics where, and by that I mean things like hours saved, but not really yet seeing ROI where you've got a lot of avoidance of needing to hire staff or a lot of redundancies. And I will come back to a number of organisations have made some big redundancies, announced it being due to AI.
Sure.
But I would question whether some of all of those redundancies were actually related to AI or just a convenient thing to point at.
Yeah.
I think there's two aspects to address in your question. One is the measurement of AI, and the other one is oversight and purpose for people. So first of all, I would say that I think AI still is returning in many businesses on soft metrics, so things like hours saved, but it's not really returning sort of cost avoidance, revenue gain in most businesses yet. I think there is some work to do there before AI is going to be in a place where it is replacing en masse. It's often sort of augmenting roles rather than replacing entire roles. Having said that, there are some areas, if I think about insurance, for example, fraud detection, claims processing, if I think about marketing, a lot of the sort of the media planning, buying processes being affected. If I think about sales, so a lot of kind of that prospecting has definitely changed. So there are definitely elements of the industry where there are big changes. But if we think about oversight, I think that's an incredibly important part of implementing AI in a business. Without oversight, you have AI making decisions that no one sort of potentially understands. I mean, you've got, if we take an example of, say, maybe a claims processor. Now, they've spent years of analysing claims coming in. They know sort of customers, they know patterns. Now, AI picks up some of that, but what it doesn't pick up is the irrational human behaviour or maybe something that's happening out of context. And it's that gut feel that is really important with the oversight of decisions being made of AI. I think the challenge is if we start removing entire roles of like very experienced people who have spent their time doing this for a career and being able to add that knowledge and value, then we're removing sort of governance of AI. So I think there is a real tension of not getting rid of all of those people or, too soon. You really do need to sort of think about how AI is being governed and how those experienced people are really going to add value to AI implementation. I think another interesting thing actually with AI, so it reminds me of a lot of outsourcing. So kind of the previous generation's version of AI almost, it was the promise that, it was going to fundamentally change business. There's going to be so much cost efficiency. And it did to an extent. And you'll know this, Paul, through your career as well. It outsourced, but I think it depended on how organizations approached outsourcing. And this is an analogy to how organizations approach AI. So in my experience in the early days, a lot of companies simply shifted broken processes offshore, added in a contract, a time zone, a bit more complexity, and then expected that to kind of work. And what they got was broken processes, maybe a bit cheaper, maybe a little bit faster. And if we do the same with AI, simply apply it on top of broken processes, on messy data estates, because most organizations don't have the data in the right order, then we simply end up with a broken business more quickly. And it's another area I find really interesting when it comes to AI is accountability of who owns an AI model in an organization or who owns an AI agent if you're starting to move into introducing agents in your organization, and who is responsible for that, for decisions it makes. And what I found, I'd be interested to hear what you're finding, is across, it's often that sort of accountability is spread across vendors, it's spread across data science teams, across product, across business sponsors. But when the AI makes a decision, who's the named individual that is going to be held accountable for it?
Yeah, and I love that, Nadine. That comparison actually is the first time I've heard it, but with the outsourcing, because in my head it's almost a black box. So you've got outsourcers who, you have an engagement, but to some extent it's a black box. You're trusting the supplier with that. Similarly with AI, you're trusting the AI. Now the difference, as you say, in my opinion, you've got suppliers who should be on the hook, and at least there's a conversation. However, you can't tell Anthropic or ChatGPT to govern itself, right? So it's a great question. I don't know is the honest answer. I think one of the key challenges with a lot of our clients is around AI and governance. So using AI is one thing, but especially in heavily regulated industries, as you say, insurance, asset management, et cetera, it's the governance part. So whether you use AI or not is predetermined pretty much by the regulation around the industry, I would say, and how much people use it is what we're seeing.
And I think when it comes to governance, what I'm starting to see as good practice in the organizations I'm working with at the moment is having someone accountable, like a business sponsor for every AI model, every AI agent. Now, that's a lot of work, but I think it's critical. And also having someone responsible. So the accountable is obviously the person ultimately that is on the hook for it. But you need someone who's day-to-day responsible, who is kind of looking at the AI output, can do escalations if the output looks a bit wrong or they've got an ethical question about it, and without that, and particularly in regulated industries, without that kind of a clear named person, accountability and responsibility, then I think you are leaving, like, you're kind of throwing a decision into the air and hoping it lands in the right way.
Yeah, no, totally. So speaking of people, actually, so within the context of transformation, so Carol, you mentioned, was an interesting person. So do you want to tell us a bit about
that? So the lessons I learned from Carol.
Yes.
So this is a good story. I was running a finance transformation for an organisation, and part of that was putting in a new expense platform. And they were moving from a manual expense platform. You might remember the old days of printing out your form and filling it in and stapling your receipts. And you hand it to Carol. And Carol was long tenured. I think she'd been in the organisation 40 years. She was much loved. She knew the organisation inside and out. And we're moving from that manual process, which Carol knew very well, into an automated system, automated approvals, flags, edge cases. Now, the transformation overall, because I've been looking at finance as a transformation, had been going very well, had stakeholders aligned, so all the department heads were aligned, had influencers in the organisation bought in, had champions, the new processes had been tested, they were working, the technology was fine. And then it almost fell at the last hurdle because of Carol.
Right.
Now, Carol, every organisation actually has a Carol. I'm sure you can. I'm sure our kind of your viewers are thinking about the Carol in their organisation right now. It's that long tenured person who knows where all the skeletons are hidden, who can often be the biggest blocker to change. Now, if I come back to Carol, what was interesting is that she wasn't opposed to change and she wasn't opposed to modernisation, but she was protecting her purpose. And this sort of comes back to a critical success factor for transformations. And we touched on it a little bit sort of in the beginning, but transformations to really be successful need to understand who is impacted by them, from groups of people to the individuals. And it has to understand what they're going to lose or gain and what is their purpose and what is going to happen to their purpose once the transformation has come to an end. So have they got a new purpose, or are there some really tough conversations to have about with people about kind of what's going to happen in the transformation, and perhaps this is not going to be the space for them going forward. Now, coming back to Carol, found Carol a new purpose. So Carol moved into procurement, where her knowledge of suppliers and sort of spending patterns was actually very useful. So we found a new purpose for Carol, and the transformation went ahead.
Brilliant.
But I wouldn't have that story to tell you if I'd addressed all of that human element up front. And that's been a lesson I've taken into future transformations, which I think is really important. And it's often, and it wasn't that I'd completely forgotten the people piece, because I had a lot of stakeholders aligned, but I think what came out of that transformation lesson for me is that just a single individual can actually be the person that stops an overall fundamental change happening. And you really need to have mapped out groups of people and individuals and what the impact of them is, impact of a transformation is going to be on them.
Okay, brilliant. We do like to end each episode with a simple but powerful question. So what would you say is one thing in your experience that you wish business leaders knew sooner?
Oh, I'm not sure this would be a sentence, Paul.
Okay.
I'd say the transformation isn't necessarily about technology or process. It's about winning hearts and minds and being able to paint a picture of a better future for an organisation that people can buy into, and getting people to want to go there. For me, I'd say transformation's a leadership test.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Paul.